This is Dr. Ellis, and in this video we're going to talk a little bit about your third draft. And so instead of seeing me, what I've got here up on the screen is I've got just a Word document I've created. The reason I've got this up is because I want to just show you some tips and some tricks in Word that will help you format your report. But before I go into this, I do want to talk a little bit about this draft. You'll get a lot more information in the modules with the directions. But the idea for the third draft is this is where you're going to build the body of the report. So up to this point, you've created, you and your group members, or if you're working by yourself, you've explored the data and you've primarily looked at variables that were related to your topic. So you may have looked at flu vaccines, pneumonia vaccines, HPV test, mammograms, whether or not somebody has a primary care physician. Each of you have different subtopics that you have focused on, and you have also looked at demographic variables for your state. So in the body of the report, this is where you really present all those plots and those tables that you have made, and you might have to make some additional ones, but at this stage making new ones really shouldn't be too bad. But of course, as always, if you need help with that, I'm more than happy to help. But the big idea of the body of your report is it's really going to have three sections to it. The first section is where you're going to univariately summarize different demographic variables, and I've required that you look at a minimum 4 of those variables. So for example, you might look at age, you might look at race, education, whether or not people in your state have insurance. Depending on what your topics are, you may have decided gender is another one. If you're looking at a topic that just deals with women's health, you probably don't want to summarize sex. So, this will be a little bit dependent, the choice of demographic variables, on what your topic is. But in that first section, you're going to summarize univariately, so just one variable at a time, different demographics for your state. In the next section, you're going to summarize the variables that are for your topic. So for example, again, if you were focused on HPV tests and mammograms, you'll have a plot summarizing each of those. If you were looking at flu vaccines and pneumonia vaccines, you'll have a plot for each of those. So that will just depend on what your main topic is, and again, you're only going to look at that univariately in that second section. The third section is where you're going to start looking at things multivariately, and that's where you're going to make that comparison between all of your demographic variables and your topic variables. So again, for example, if your topic was flu vaccine, you'll want to look at flu vaccine compliance for each of those demographic variables that you had in section 1. And if you also had pneumonia vaccine, you'll want to look at the pneumonia vaccine for each of those demographic variables you had in section 1. So section 3 is going to by far be the largest section, because again, this is where you're going to compare each of your variables in section 1 to each of your variables from section 2. And section 3 is usually the one that is the most important, because that's going to help us identify maybe areas where there's non-compliance. Maybe we find those who are less educated have more non-compliance compared to those that are highly educated, for example. And this is where you're going to be exploring that and seeing if you can find those variables that are associated. So that's kind of the overall idea of what you're going to be doing in the body of the report. What I wanted to show you here in Word are just a couple things that will help you format if you're not already familiar with these. And some of these I already showed you in the Module 4 intro video, but I thought it would be good to bring them up again. So the three things that I want to bring your attention to, the first one is in the Home tab, and it is this style section here. This is what's going to help you create headers and subheaders. You can define these to look however you want, and I'll do that here in a second. I also, in the insert, the page break can be really useful. And then under references, the table of contents. So another part of this draft, in addition to the body, you are going to be adding in the table of contents, and I'm going to show you a really easy way to do that. Alright, so starting here in my Word document, just really big here, I've got the word cover page, because we know the very first page of our report is going to be the cover page. Now, typically after I write text, and if I know the next piece of text needs to go on the next page, this is where this page break can come in really handy. So now my first page is just reserved for that cover page, and most of you have copied and pasted those over from Canva. Everybody already has a cover page. Now, let's say on the next page, I'm going to skip a couple sections that you have because you also have an infographic that's going to be put in here. You've got your introduction, but let's just say for sake of argument that I'm going to move right into the body of my report. And so the very first section or main section that I would have in my report, that's where I'm going to be summarizing my demographics. And let's just say I'm going to call this demographics for Kentucky. And so this is where I'm going to univariately summarize different variables for the state of Kentucky. And so let's say maybe I know that I'm going to look at age, I'm going to look at sex, I'm going to look at education, and I'm going to look at race. So each of these are going to be subsections within demographics for Kentucky. So what I can do to make this easier for myself is up here in the styles, I could assign demographics for Kentucky, that's a header 1, and then each of these are header 2s because they're subheaders and they're subsections within demographics. The reason to do this, and I'll show you this here in just a moment, this is going to help you easily and quickly create a table of contents. Alright, now for each of these subsections, what you're going to find is you're going to write some kind of narrative about the plot, and then after that you're going to insert a plot. So for example, I'm just going to pull a plot that I have off of my computer, and so here's my plot and I have my narrative up here. Now notice that by the time I write 2 or 3 sentences and I add in a plot, if I were to just immediately go in and looking at the sex variable, I'm going to have probably the narrative down here and the plot on the next page. We really don't want that. We want, our narrative and our plots to be on the same page. So an easy way to do that is just to have each of these plots with their narratives on its own individual page. And if you look at that example epi report that I referenced in the directions, you're going to see that. And so one easy way to make sure that you keep that format is actually to use that page break. So what I'm going to do is right before my next subsection where I'm going to univariately look at sex, I could go to insert page break and it will automatically take it to a next page. And I can actually do this for each of these just right off the bat before I even go and put in those narratives or anything else. And notice here under sex, for example, if I go in and I type, education does not keep moving down. If you were to just hit enter, 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 enter until education got on the next page, every time you would type or add things in here, education would consistently move down. The page break keeps that from happening, and that's why that's so useful. And again, you could go ahead and set up your 3 main headers with your subheaders before you ever put in any plots or narratives or anything, and you'll go ahead and have that nice formatting and you can just go and put in the different pieces. Alright, so, and one thing to notice here is after I have, all of my text up here in my plot, I'm likely to have some blank white space down here at the bottom. That's perfectly fine. We don't need to worry about that. Alright, and again, you'll see that in some of those example reports. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is why this will help you build a table of contents. So what I'm going to do is on my second page I want to have a table of contents. So before the demographics for Kentucky, I'm going to add another one of those page breaks. That's going to give me an empty page here, and I'm going to put my cursor up at the top. I'm going to click on table of contents, and then notice I clicked on manual table. I don't want manual table, I actually want automatic, so I'm going to pick the second one. Alright, so now notice that I've done this correctly. We have table of contents. So it automatically put in that demographics for Kentucky in each of my subsections. So notice this way, I don't have to worry about making dots, building my table of contents. Word is going to do that automatically. The only thing I have to be careful of is to make sure that I do have in there, each of my headers and my subheaders that I want. Now you might say, okay, that's great, but these headers and subheaders don't really look the way that I want them to match, the style for your document. Well, that's an easy thing to fix. We can go back to home, and let's say that we want age to look different. So I'm going to click on age, and notice it's header 2. If I right click, I can modify, and let's say that I really wanted this to be orange. I wanted all the subheaders to be 14 font, I wanted them to be bold, and so that's the way that they would look. And then if I click on automatically update and I click OK, notice that each of the subheaders now look like that. So I only had to edit one of them and all of them change. And now even when I add in, let's say I was going to add in a new one, oops, see if I came down here after race and I don't know, just I write the word example here and I click on header 2, it retains that. Alright, so that's just a couple tips and tricks in Word. Of course, if you have trouble with any of these, I'm more than happy to help you. But those are just some quick time savers, especially when it comes to building the table of contents. So as always, if you have any questions, if you need help, please let me know.